Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers.
And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 15, Episode 146. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Wednesday, Steelers Nation. And Dave, Tuesday felt a little surreal in some sense. Aaron Rodgers' first practice in Pittsburgh, spoke to the media for the first time. Day one of minicamp wrapping up, day two underway Wednesday. Pittsburgh will hold their final session Thursday before their summer break. So plenty to talk about. Aaron Rodgers, signed, sealed, delivered, speaking to the media, out there practicing. How you doing, Dave?
Yeah, good morning. Happy Wednesday to you. Happy Wednesday to all the listeners as well, too. Yeah, it was a little bit surreal. We talked about this going all the way back to March, about the possibility of Aaron Rodgers landing and thinking it would ultimately get done, and it gets done, and you still got to kind of process seeing it in your head, all those videos and pictures of him out there in that white practice jersey with the number 8 on it, with a Steelers helmet on, and just things that you never would have thought that you would have saw several years ago. So I think a lot of people at this point, including myself, are the reality is finally hitting that he's going to be this team's quarterback moving forward into 2025, and gave his first official press conference yesterday. And it'd be interesting. Look, this is not a lot of people are saying, I'm not going to watch. We're not going to watch. Yeah, you're going to watch it. You know you're going to watch it. Why wouldn't you watch it? This is going to be an interesting season to cover when it comes to the Steelers and Aaron Rodgers, and obviously the team as a whole. And it's going to be. We've got a lot to talk about the first day of mandatory minicamp, and obviously things that the defensive position coaches had to say. A few of the players that we got audio on, we can talk about as well too. And we also now, thanks to Albert Breer, kind of prodded him earlier in the afternoon on Twitter. Hey, get us the finer details, the incentives of that Aaron Rodgers contract. And by the end of midway through the day or whatnot, he had that. So we can talk a little bit about what those incentives are. We can look at the team's cap situation at this point, and we ought to be able to fill up an hour in this show, I think.
As we always do. Let's start, though, not with Aaron Rodgers, who was at minicamp. That was one storyline that wrapped up over the past week. Will he or won't he report to minicamp, and transition to another attendance check-in on one player who was not there, believed to be the only Steeler not in attendance on Tuesday. That is one T.J. Watt, who is apparently staying away from mandatory minicamp this week as he looks for that contract extension. He will now be subject to fines up to $104,000, as you outlined. So that is one non-Rodgers headline. Watt not at minicamp, Dave.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised. I kind of thought he'd show up and just do nothing, but I guess in his defense, he views that. Look, I tried to take the more, I guess, diplomatic or lower key approach to this thing the last time around in the contract negotiations. Showed up at all these things. Showed up at mandatory minicamp. He did show up at mandatory minicamp last time, right? The contract.
He did.
Yeah, and then obviously showed up for training camp, and then had kind of the hold in, if you will, and all that got him was a long wait deep into the summer, and finally pushing to get that thing done at the 11th hour before the regular season started. So I guess he thinks his thinking is that seemed to take a lot of time last time around. Maybe I'll get their attention a little bit more this time by not showing up at mandatory minicamp, and and see what that gets me this time. I don't think as a whole, the organization doesn't sound too terribly concerned about it. Mike Tomlin talked yesterday about, yeah, we certainly like him here, but not overly surprised that he's not. And business is business. And in the long run, I don't think anybody's concerned about this ultimately getting done. But, you have to wonder, or what will this mean past mandatory minicamp moving forward into training camp? Might he say, "Look, I'm not going to come to training camp. You want to find me, find me." And you just hurt yourselves by not having him around and going through the motions and mentoring some of these guys, especially some of these younger guys, and the whole communication aspect, and you're just disrupting the flow, if you will. So I don't fault the guy for not being there. I think the Steelers, I think most that have listened to this show and things we've written, things we've talked about, kind of wondering why the Steelers have kind of dragged their feet in this, particularly this offseason with the cash and cap situation that they're in. But here we are, mandatory minicamp, no TJ Watt. Doesn't seem like he's going to show up for any of it. And then obviously all of his teammates have got to be got to answer questions about it. They'll get tired of that. The coaches will get tired of that, and then they'll take a break for 5.5 weeks and report to training camp. We'll have to see what happens at that point. Now, without a shadow of a doubt, like I've stated all off season, this will get done at some point. If you're listening to this and you think the Steelers should just trade TJ Watt, good luck with that. I understand why some people would think that. If you continue to want to hardline that be your opinion, fine. But this will get done at some point. Is just going through the minutia of getting it done, and will it ultimately be a result of him sitting out training camp, or a good part of training camp, or all of training camp and all the preseason before you do get it done? So, I mean, that's where we're at. Once again, I kind of thought he'd show up and just do nothing, but he didn't, and that's the part of where we're at in this offseason now that needs discussion.
It was, to me, at least mildly surprising to see him not attend. The expectation, and maybe I just was completely off base about that, but I don't think I saw anybody in the local or national media or anyone really floating the idea that Watt would skip minicamp. We all figured if he did attend, he wouldn't do anything. He would be on the sideline and just be a spectator. And that may be the reason why he decided not to show up, knowing why go to Pittsburgh for 3 days to stand around, do nothing. He just had his first child earlier this year. Why be away from his family to go to Pittsburgh to just stand there and watch a team practice for a couple days and then go back to presumably Wisconsin, where he's at right now? So is this a big deal, though? It may be surprising to know that Watt's not there, but does this signal trouble in negotiation, or is this just a little bit of pressure on Pittsburgh combined with Watt maybe realizing there really wasn't a point to attend?
I wouldn't call it a big deal. I'd just call it a deal.
Okay.
Look, everybody would much rather have him there than not being there. And new baby aside, if he had that contract in his hand right now, he'd be there right now.
Sure. But does this signal, though, any potential rift in negotiations, or am I, and not that I'm exclaiming that as fact, but is there a potential sign that Watt is unhappy? We had the Instagram story back in early April. We have Watt skipping minicamp now. Does that signal frustration, or does that not? Is that reading too much into it?
My old man used to say, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction that people have. So his reaction, I think, is to this probably not being close at this point,
Mm-hmm.
Obviously a dissatisfaction. I mean, he's already, and look, I know they play, I've said this before, I know they play different positions and all like that. And look, his agent isn't stupid. They see the cash and payments that are made to other players and how much guys are earning. I mean, this is a team that's already gone out and given DK Metcalf $35 million in cash this season. He's already seen what guys like Myles Garrett has gotten this offseason. He sees all the things that Hendrickson's going through with the Bengals, those kind of things. And then once again, he knows the process that he went through last year, and all that got him was a long wait and an 11th hour up in the offices, him telling his agent, just get it done kind of thing. And he probably would like to shorten that time gap this year, instead of just you going about his business and showing up and he just wanted to get their attention a little bit more this year. So, I mean, once again, am I confident this gets done? Yes. He's just going about a different process of trying to get it done quicker, I think. So is there obviously dissatisfaction on his side? Yeah. I think there is. I think he thinks that along with his brother, like his brother JJ has said, the longer you wait on this, you could have had this done last year. Now, obviously, the Steelers have a way of doing business with players 2 years out, and that kind of thing there. Okay, if that's the course of action, and you didn't want to get this done 2 years out, then immediately first opportunity this offseason, you should have been out ahead of this thing and trying to get it done. And they obviously didn't. So that's where we're at right now. So I wouldn't call it a big deal, because in the long and short of it, I think I think TJ will be happy. I think they'll get to a spot where both sign what they deem a fair contract. But obviously, right now he's not happy. So I think it is fair to say that. But in the grand scheme of things, do I think this is a big deal? No, I think this is just a deal and something you have to deal with.
Well said. Well said. And as 2021 showed, even if a deal doesn't get done until very late in this process, that does not necessarily mean it's going to hamper Watt's play. In 21, deal done right before the season began. Watt had missed all the training camp, all the preseason, had just worked off to the side during his hold-in, goes out there and ties the NFL sack record with 22.5 sacks. I think another reason why Watt probably calculated let's not attend is he doesn't have to talk about his contract. If he was there, media's probably going to have to ask him some questions. He's going to have to give some commentary on it. That's going to become a story, and it is a little difficult. What do you say right now? He wants to get paid. He wants to stay in Pittsburgh. Those things at the moment are at odds because the deal's not done. I'm with you. A deal will get done at some point, but it's a tricky situation right now. So why attend minicamp for 3 days to do nothing, to have to ask and be asked and peppered by the media with questions, be forced to give an answer? TJ Watt, not a big fan of talking to the media in general in the first place. So I guess in hindsight, it makes sense. He is subject to fines. I'm going to bet, as you tweeted out, Dave, that those fines will get waived once a deal does get done. Teams can recall those and rescind those. They don't have to issue those fines if they don't choose during minicamp. So it makes a lot of sense overall. He's not the only one missing mandatory minicamp. We see Trey Hendrickson in Cincinnati, Terry McLaurin in Washington. So that is happening around the league a little bit. But I'd like this deal to get done before training camp. I would hate for this thing, even knowing what I just said about, Watt having that great season in 21, despite missing all the summer. I would love for this thing to be put to bed by the time the team reports. I would like to think there's some more urgency to get a deal done with Watt, but we'll have to wait and see.
He'll miss that $100,000 in fines the way you miss $100 bills that fall out of your pocket, Alex.
You know me all too well. But they can rescind those, right? Those aren't.
I believe, I believe. I think in the training camp.
I think training camp cannot be rescinded.
Yeah, but they'll get all that will come out in the wash eventually.
And sometimes teams, even if you do get fined, they'll just add on an extra, whatever the fine amount is, they'll add that on extra to your contract to basically make you whole. Now, is there any chance Watt holds out of training camp? If he does report and there is no contract to hold in, I think it's very reasonable and would be the expectation at this point. Could he hold out? They are rare because the fines are very punitive and you don't see it that often, but it did happen with Chris Jones a couple of years ago. That deal took a long time to get done. He missed the regular season game. If Watt is saying, I'm willing to be fined and miss minicamp, would he be willing to be fined and miss training camp?
I think it's very plausible at this point now.
Okay.
I think it is just him trying a different course of action. Now, in the past, the Steelers have said, you know, what have they said when some of these guys,
We
attempt
don't
to,
negotiate until you get
yeah,
here.
yeah. So that's when it will become more has the possibility of really becoming more contentious at that point. Is if he doesn't show up at the start of training camp, and then the Steelers come out and hardline like they have had, because they don't want this to become a precedent down the road as well either, and that's why they've taken the side that they've taken before. No, not in camp, no negotiation type. So that's when it really could get kind of wondering, all right. Is there a possibility this thing rolls into the season? At this point, I'm going to hope that it doesn't get to that point. Look, they've been waiting. That you get through the draft and all like that. You get through free agency. You get through all this Aaron Rodgers hubba bubba, and you got his contract settled. What is there left as far as finances really have to go that you have to kind of put the jigsaw puzzle together as far as cash and cap and all of that goes right now? And you got a good enough look at the edge rusher market at right now, and if anything, you want to get out ahead of maybe a whatever happens with Trey Hendrickson. You've already know that you got a number to top more than likely in Myles Garrett, and I would imagine from where we sit right now, TJ Watt wants to be the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL right now. Uh, and that includes the wide receivers and everything. So I would imagine that's where he's at and his agent and all right now. So the longer that you wait, the longer you run the risk of that number going even higher. From where it is right now. But I would be surprised if their side of the table is not at we want TJ Watt to be the highest paid non-quarterback, and we want full guarantees through probably the first 3 years, just what as was the case last time. Uh that's what we want. Are you willing to get it done? And in what time frame?
So what's the holdup? If Pittsburgh recognizes that, and in 21 you had to go through all the dance of the guaranteed money past year one, that door's been opened and shouldn't be the issue that it was before. Why has this deal not occurred? There's apparently an offer on the table. Mark Cabali reported that. I believe it's been confirmed by other sources. Obviously not to Watt and his camp's liking, so I presume it's not checking one or more of those boxes. Why is this deal still outstanding and we're all still waiting?
You want me to get Omar Khan on the phone?
If you have him, be great.
I mean, I got his phone number, but I don't. I have a feeling that we wouldn't get any answers to any questions if we were able to get him on the line. It's a great question. I don't know if this has anything to do with maybe escrowing enough cash or anything along those lines, but I don't know. I don't know why this is not done at this point. Especially if we are to accept the fact that he wants to be the highest paid non-quarterback, and he wants full guarantees through the first 3 years.
And presumably, as of right now, at least Pittsburgh is not willing to do one or more of those things. I know I asked that question rhetorically. No one knows exactly what the holdup is right now, other than to say that Pittsburgh often does not get deals done until July, August, September. That's kind of their timeline typically. But I just see no reason, as you said, with no other business to take care of, with the Rodgers situation closed up, that contract done. It's a pretty cheap contract. We'll talk about details in a moment. Get this thing done before July 23rd, before they report. You have 6 weeks to hammer this thing out. Get it ahead of Micah Parsons, ahead of Aiden Hutchinson, Trey Hendrickson. Get this thing done in that 5-6 week window. Go into training camp full speed ahead. That would be a sensible, ideal scenario.
Yeah, that's definitely my hope. But where's the urgency going to be, at least in the next 4 weeks? mandatory minicamp. Deadlines is what spur action, and obviously
Mhm.
the closer, if you can't get it done this week, and I think we both agree the odds of that happening are probably not great, then I think at a minimum we're going to be wondering for at least the next 4 weeks of will it get done in that final week and a half leading up to training camp. I have a hard time imagining that during those 4 weeks, 5.5 weeks of downtime, that anything significant would happen within the first 4 weeks.
Fair, but it is the quietest time of year, and it is the time where you think, okay, there's the chance to have a conversation, get this thing done. You're right, deadlines per actions. That happened with Watt's last deal, getting that done right under the wire. That's typically, Pittsburgh didn't sign Haywood and Frymuth until very late in the summer months last year, right before the season began. So that is typically how this thing goes, even under Omar Khan. He's gotten a couple deals done ahead of time, but it still had some Cold War twinge of last second deal making. But I would love for this one to be an exception to get done like Mika Fitzpatrick got done in, June a couple years ago to get this thing all taken care of before this team goes to Latrobe.
There's no sense in calling his bluff here, and like I said, getting this
No.
thing more contentious here, and having fans already think everybody signs a new contract is overpaid for the most part, and all he cares about is money, and you run the risk of more people getting more upset at the player, I guess, more than potentially the organization, because they don't follow the cash and the cap and all that as religiously as some of us do. Just my hope would be that in that final week and a half, they don't get to a situation where you're putting him in a situation of not showing up to training camp and this thing blowing up even more than it's already going to been having been blown up at the time. Just you're going to know what the parameters are throughout
Mhm.
this summer. Just get it done in those days leading up to training camp, and let him show up to training camp. Get that first media session out of the way about him signing the new deal, about why he took the actions that he did, and then that way everybody can move on through training camp at that point.
Right. I can understand in 2021 why it took so long because there was that whole dance of having Pittsburgh break that seal of guaranteed money for a non quarterback past year one. That was going to be a difficult negotiation. I think we knew that going in. This time around, it has become more complicated, no question, by Myles Garrett and Max Crosby to Neil Hunter, and can be furthered by Parsons and Hendrickson and Hutchinson. But the parameters, as you said, should be more known, clearer. Some of those barriers have been broken down already. That should lend itself to a deal being easier to get done. We'll see if that happens, if that accelerates the timeline or not.
And for those of people that have driven off the road this morning hearing me say highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL, he doesn't deserve that. Trade him. I mean, I don't. I hope you up to date on your insurance premiums and all like that, because I mean it kind of is what it is. That's the market. This team, and we'll get into this a little bit more in a little bit. This team has in my head another $30 million in cash that I think they're going to spend this offseason. I envision a good 20 of that now going towards T.J. Watt on top of the 21 million that he's scheduled to earn this year, and the meter's running. So I think you if you don't spend the money now, I know we had this conversation. Well, you just got to spend it by the end of the year 3 of the CBA and all like that. But all of it's lined up for them to get things done and get that cash spending out of the way this year to play catch up over last year and all. So, once again, if you are listening to this and you are in the camp of thinking that that's too much to pay T.J. Watt, they shouldn't pay it. They should trade him. All right. I mean, that's your opinion, but all I can tell you that get yourself prepared for the team to pay that and get to the point where he is in a situation where he's more than likely the highest paid non-quarterback in the league at time that he signs the deal.
And the team has already stated explicitly, we want to re-sign T.J. Watt. We want to make him a Steeler for life. And so they kind of box themselves in to commit and follow through on those words and produce that in action in the form of a contract.
Right.
All right, Dave, we'll see what happens there. Don't expect Watt to be at minicamp on Wednesday or Thursday. Everyone else, though, to my knowledge, is in attendance. DK Metcalf is there. Cordero Patterson is there. Chris Boswell is there, and even kicking a little bit. So he's doing
Shame
a
on
little
him.
something. Yeah. What's his agent doing, Dave? Call him up and yell at him a little bit.
Shame on him.
Everyone else is there. And of course, Aaron Rodgers is there, had his first practice yesterday with the team. Will practice Wednesday and Thursday. Had the press conference after practice, well attended by every media conglomerate under the sun, about a 20-plus minute presser. Overall, Dave, it was fine. And I think some Steeler fans would expect every Aaron Rodgers press conference to be chaotic and crazy and wild. That's not going to be the case. Maybe something that happens later this season, but Rodgers is a professional. I think he does, in a lot of ways, he handles the media pretty well. He knows what to expect at this point, and the Pittsburgh media not quite as daunting and as edgy as maybe some of the past markets out there with the New York market that he was in the past 2 seasons. So overall, what are your big picture takeaways from Rodgers' first session with the media?
I thought he was prepared. I enjoyed it. I don't think you have to. He's very easy to transcribe. I don't think you have to worry about him naming every wide receiver or running back and offensive lineman on the roster in every press conference. I think I don't think I thought he handled himself very well within that. Now he is a different kind of animal, if you will, and what were some of the key terms that that he said about I'm trying to think the buzzword that he said yesterday.
I'm not sure which you're referring
I'm
to.
gonna have to pull it up in here. I'll get to it here in a minute when I pull the transcript up. But good for the soul. That was it. Or what was best for his soul at this point. Look, he understands what's at stake here. I think he reiterated how much he's been a fan of Mike Tomlin over the years. I kind of like how he mixed in his Pittsburgh roots and linking to Mike McCarthy and Tom Clements and all Kevin Green and oh boy, who else did he name?
Frank Cignetti.
Cignetti, all the great quarterbacks that have come out of the Western PA area. Oh, geez, what else did he talk about within all that? And what a significant organization the Steelers are, and how he played for another one for all those years in Green Bay. And I think he is looking for a fresh start. He didn't take the bait on the New York Jets question that he was asked. I was glad about that. I think he understands what's at stake here. This might be Grandpa's last ride, if you will. And I think he's cognizant of the fact that how he's going to be judged this season moving forward, and how it's either going to be a footnote on his career of, and Aaron Rodgers went on to end his career in Pittsburgh, kind of a nondescript season, and off to the into the sunset. He said that he feels like it's he's still got something to really give the game, if you will. I enjoyed the fact the comments that he made about Will Howard, and going to be more than willing to help him. He understands that he's still got a lot to learn about this offense at this point. He pointed to some of the verbiage of the Shanahan offensive tree and how that should help him within that. He's still got to learn a lot of names on the roster. He's got to learn what direction he takes when he comes out of certain rooms going to other rooms. I don't think he's happy with the helmet that he's having to wear right now. He wore that shut helmet for all those years, and now that's been deemed unsafe. So I think people will use that as Aaron Rodgers already trying to make an excuse of not liking his helmet. And if things go off the rails, look, he'll find a helmet that he can play with. It might take a little while to go through a couple of them here, so I don't think that will be the issue here. But I think overall, for what was it, 15 minutes, I thought he handled himself fairly well. And I think moving forward, he will be selective in. He's Is this the last time we hear from him through mandatory minicamp?
I would expect so. I don't think we'll hear from him the next 2 days.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be a guy clamoring to talk to the media after every practice. I think he'll have his day during the week, obviously post game stuff. Yeah, I mean, I came away. I don't want to say impressed because I've watched enough of his press conference, but I thought it was as is. I enjoyed it.
Thought there was a sense of pride that he had in joining Pittsburgh, and maybe that changes some of the narrative a little bit about a guy that some perceive to be all about him. And there's certainly a level of ego and probably bordering on narcissism in Aaron Rodgers, and that can be true for a lot of quarterbacks with his type of resume. I think Tom Brady could say similar things about him, but he was a guy that was very respectful of the organization, and as you said, the chance to get to play for Pittsburgh, not just this didn't sound like a guy that was holding a team hostage the last 3 months and playing them along and stringing them along and then showing up whenever he wanted to show up, at least in terms of the commentary that he offered. In terms of some of the particulars, talked about why he waited this long, which was, of course, a big question, why this 3-month wait, and didn't get into the details, obviously, but as he discussed on the Pat McAfee show back in April, the personal things he was going through in that situation has apparently improved, which allowed Rodgers to think about football, focus on that, and commit to playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He discussed the big draw of why he chose Pittsburgh was Mike Tomlin, as we've heard from so many players before, whether they're young guys or 21-year-old future Hall of Famers like Aaron Rodgers. Mike Tomlin is the main attraction for Pittsburgh. Rodgers saying he appreciated how Tomlin treated him. They had great conversations. He said they had just had a conversation last Sunday. He said it was one of the coolest conversations he's ever had with a head coach. Didn't detail what that conversation entailed, but apparently liked whatever he heard. So, as Pittsburgh struggles to find their footing, they're in this kind of purgatory. They're not going to pay you the most amount of money. They're not going to have the nicest facility. They're not going to be, as of right now, a Super Bowl contender. What is the biggest draw for players to want to come to Pittsburgh? It is, and has been for several years now, Mike Tomlin.
Yeah, he says, I think it starts with Mike Tomlin. I mean, I've been a fan of his for a long time. There's a few iconic franchises in the NFL. I played for one of them for 18 years. This is another one of those. There's something special about, obviously, this area. So many great quarterbacks are from Pittsburgh. I feel like Pittsburgh has been a part of my career from the beginning. And then that's when he went on to talk about McCarthy and some of the other links and all. He says, I think I just want to be a servant leader here and just pass on the knowledge that I have for 20 years. The experience, and just try to fit in with the guys, get to know them, let them get to know me, and just enjoy the process. Everything's new. It's like the first day of school. I don't know a lot of the guys' names. They don't have names on the back of their jerseys here. They don't have names on the doors in the meeting rooms. I'd literally walk out of the locker room lost. Why he still wants to play. He says, I think that's what it is. Like, I don't need it for my ego. I don't need it to keep playing. A lot of decisions that I've made over my career and life from strictly the ego, even if they turn out well, are always unfulfilling. But the decisions made from the soul are usually pretty fulfilling. So this was a decision that was best for my soul. And I felt like being here with Coach T and the guys that they've got here and the opportunity here was the best for me, and I'm excited to be here.
And it's a real stark contrast to, I think, his time with the Jets, where I think he had a couple decent relationships within that organization. It was a rocky ride in New York. And then, of course, the unceremonious way, in Rodgers' mind, at least the way that he was cut by the Jets. He flies out from California, meets with the Jets' new regime, Aaron Glenn and company, thinks it's going to be a multi-hour meeting, a real good heart-to-heart. It's a 15-minute short discussion of, hey, we're cutting you. How do you want the announcement to go? All right, see you later. Obviously pissed Rodgers off. Right or wrong, that was his interpretation of it. So he goes to Pittsburgh, that is patient with him, is willing to give him some grace and some time, be in communication with him. And I'm sure Rodgers appreciated that. And that is what I'm sure sold him on Pittsburgh. Rodgers acknowledged there were conversations with other teams, Sure, the Vikings were one of them. The Rams, Sean McVay was on Good Morning Football today and said the team maybe more internally had conversations about would they go to Rodgers if they moved on from Stafford. That obviously never really got anywhere with them retaining Stafford, but Rodgers ultimately said he was either going to play for Pittsburgh or not play at all, presumably meaning retirement. And so that was his calculation, and that was the calculation we thought for quite some time. It was Pittsburgh or bust, and that's what happened, and obviously choosing Pittsburgh.
Yep. He feels on being a little bit further away from his Achilles injury from a couple years ago. He says, yeah, I mean, I'm 41, so my body feels different than it did at 25, but I feel better. Felt good last year. I worked really hard. It was a tough couple of years getting hurt and then rehabbing for a year to get back, but I feel good. So there's that element. He seemed to be moving around just fine in some of those drills that I saw on the interwebs yesterday. He was asked about if he anticipates having another workout with any other guys between now and training camp. I got a kick out of this response. He says, I do. I just got to try and convince them to come out to Malibu, California. It's going to be a tough sell, I think. Tough sell. I have been to Malibu out in that area. Alex, that's not going to be that tough of a sell.
Yeah, I think those guys will gleefully join him at some point, so I'm sure we'll be talking and writing about that during the offseason. I didn't get any indication there were additional workouts with DK Metcalf. I know Rodgers, I believe, referenced it, but seemed to be referring to the one that we all knew about, which happened, I think, late March, early April, whenever that was. So I don't know if there was any additional workouts there, but I'm sure they'll all get together sometime in June or July.
All right. I slept better last night knowing for sure that Aaron Rodgers got married in the last couple of months or whatnot. And maybe that play, I'm being a bit of a smart ass there, but I mean, he's talked about personal stuff and, could the marriage have been part of that? I imagine so. I think he's got some friends dealing, obviously, with some health issues that he talked about on McAfee, and we've talked about how he probably just, OTA is just not one of the things that have ever been high on his list. So I don't think it was a huge shock, as we stated the other day, that as soon as OTAs ended, he was coming to Pittsburgh to sign the contract. Here we are. He's in mandatory minicamp. He's starting to obviously learn the offense. He's had it sounds like he didn't come in cold, right? He probably had some sense of what he was dealing with the offense and all like that. And these 3 days are obviously important to some degree, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be doing a lot as far as team stuff goes. He did state that he'll do whatever Mike Tomlin wants him to do, but that Mike wants them to kind of mainly stick to individual drills and I guess learning the offense and learning to getting on page with the terminology and things of that nature. So I don't think we're going to be talking about a lot of Aaron Rodgers on 11-11 type portions of practice and all like that. Mike Tomlin sounds fine with that. That hey, anytime Aaron Rodgers gets, Aaron Rodgers, these reps are more important to a guy like Will Howard than it is a guy that's been through this 18, 19 times already. So I can kind of see that side of it. But I think it is important at this point in time, knowing that the amount of or the lack of amount of kind of team stuff that Aaron Rodgers will get done in these 3 days. Hopefully we are talking about 2, 3, 4 sessions out there in California with Aaron Rodgers getting, a large group of these guys together and getting some of these finer details and timing and communication and hand signals and verbiage and all like that out of the way that they weren't able to get done during OTAs and mandatory minicamp.
Does that surprise you at all that seemingly Rodgers is not going to go through team periods and Mason Rudolph presumably will still be the one and whoever's behind and either Howard or Thompson, the number 2 during these team sessions? Yes, Rodgers is a veteran, but he's also brand new and talked about he needs to learn this offense and get adjusted and pick things up. Shouldn't he be getting some team reps to accelerate that?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah. And so an interesting approach there from Mike Tomlin, different schools of thought, but apparently right now, at least on Tuesday, maybe that changes by Thursday. Maybe he gets a couple team reps in once he kind of gets a little comfortable in some of the installs and basics of this offense, but right now just individual work, it sounds like, for Aaron Rodgers.
All right. Let me ask you this. Do you hope that I don't think he speaks anymore for the rest of mandatory minicamp. I actually hope he doesn't. Are you hoping that he does?
No, I think he said all that needs to be said. I don't think there's going to be anything radically different to say today or tomorrow. He'll talk, I'm sure. He does a golf tournament every year. Was it the American Century Classic or Championship, something like that? He's been doing for 20 plus years now, basically his entire NFL career. And usually he speaks during that. So I imagine it'll be a little discussion then, and then I'll speak during training camp.
All right. Obviously had positive things to say about DK Metcalf and just the type of person he is. What do you think about the comments he made about Darnell Washington and kind of the loose comparison he had to former tight end he's played with before?
All right. Giving a lot of praise to Darnell Washington. Aaron Rodgers talked about not having a tight end with the size and frame of a guy like Washington since Marcedes Lewis. Those two guys were together in Green Bay for the last several seasons of Rodgers' career there, so that was positive. I know Lewis had even said on the Kay Adams show recently that there was kind of a pact made between Rodgers and Lewis. They would want to try to retire together. Lewis is still playing in the NFL at 41 years old, which is even crazier than Rodgers playing at his age, but I don't know if they're going to bring in Marcedes Lewis with a guy like Darnell Washington. But yeah, good. There was praise for Metcalf, for Washington, even Connor Hayward. And so it wasn't quite the Russell Wilson go down the depth chart and praise every name on the roster, but Rodgers giving compliments to his new teammates.
And I think he was asked specifically about Darnell, though, right?
I think I forget what the question was to prompt that answer.
All right. All right. Anything else that we're missing here with the 15 minutes with Aaron?
You had mentioned it, but just to really reiterate, because it was one of those narratives that I think has always been one of those wrong narratives. You can say a lot about Aaron Rodgers. You can critique a lot about him, and I think that's fair and fine. But I think he'll be a good teammate. I think he'll be a good mentor. He is somebody who's not going to shun Will Howard, and he had mentioned that. And you talked about that. He sat down right in the meeting room next to Will Howard and is willing to help him every way he can. I have no concerns about Rodgers. I'm confident Rodgers will be a good mentor and be willing to help a guy like Will Howard. It's not going to be a Ben Mason with this kind of icy relationship. I think it's going to be a good working relationship and really good for Will Howard.
Where did all that? Because Dave Weekly asked me about that yesterday in regard to when I was on his radio show about hearing Rodgers' comments about Will Howard, and Dave Weekly asked me something to the effect of, I wonder what Jordan Love thinks about hearing that. I'm trying to recall in my head, where does all this come from that Aaron Rodgers wasn't a great mentor to Jordan Love? Because we've heard twice in the last week Tom Clements come out both on 93.7 The Fan and then on Sirius on Sunday. And now look, Clements and Rodgers spent a lot of time together. I imagine they have a very good relationship still to this day, and he's probably always going to come running to Rodgers' defense and vice versa there. But Clements, in so many words, said Aaron was a great mentor to all the young quarterbacks that he's been around, including Jordan Love. Do you know where all this has started? That Rodgers wasn't a great mentor, I guess, specifically to Jordan Love?
I'm not sure. I'm betting Packers fans can answer that better. I think it was from the controversy when Love was taken in the first round that Rodgers went on McAfee, because McAfee had done that live draft show, and Rodgers had gone on there earlier in the day and said it'd be nice to get an offensive weapon. They had drafted a receiver in the first round since Javon Walker. They were coming off NFC title game appearance, and so Rodgers understandably was hoping for, an offensive weapon or some guy who could immediately contribute, and they take Jordan Love, and that was a big shock and a big surprise. You wondered how Rodgers would react, and I think it just kind of got assumed that Rodgers was unhappy with Love being the pick because it wasn't somebody who could help the team when now it was his replacement. But as you said, and not even just from what Tom Clements has said, but from all the reporting from their time together with Love and Rodgers, it was a good relationship. I've never heard Love say a bad thing about Aaron Rodgers, and to a degree, Rodgers seemed to help Zach Wilson in New York. That was a briefer time together, and Rodgers was hurt and wasn't always around the team that year, but I think he had a good impact on Zach Wilson. So I think it just got assumed that whenever the Packers took Jordan Love, that Rodgers hated it and they wouldn't have a good relationship. I don't know if he liked the pick at the time, but I don't think there was any animosity in terms of how those two guys work together.
Look, I'm not expecting Aaron Rodgers to sit there and be a quasi quarterback coach and analyze every rep that Will Howard does and sit there and critique him all the time and say you need to do this, you need to see this. But look, I think if Will Howard and Mason Rudolph to some degree ask the right questions, they'll get the answers. You've got to, in other words, you've got to ask the teacher the right questions.
Sure, yeah, I think that's gonna be a big component of it, and there's also gonna be just a lot of learning by watching Rodgers prepare and, watch tape and go through game planning and on the sideline listening to Rodgers and what he sees and how he communicates, and there'll be a lot of things done without Rodgers even knowing he's helping and mentoring, but I think also that Rodgers will be able to help whenever it's called upon, and, I'm sure in training camp, Rodgers will get some off days or some half days that Ben got where Howard's going to get some reps and those guys will have conversations. And in preseason action, I don't know if Rodgers will play a single snap in these 3 preseason games. That's going to give Howard a lot of time. I'm sure there'll be times where Rodgers can offer pieces of advice. Yeah, it's not going to be you sit down and say, "All right, son, let me tell you everything I know," but it's going to be those informal things. Hey, on this play, watch this, or hey, we're facing this defensive coordinator. He loves to blitz on third down. Hey, we're facing Brian Flores. He got me last year overseas. I had a terrible game. They brought the house. Will Howard, this is the type of DC he is. And so those types of things I'm sure will just come up organically throughout the year. And that's all going to be helpful for a young guy.
True or false? This is the best single thing that probably could have happened from any quarterback that they could have brought in this offseason to help Will Howard.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, I think also Mason Rudolph can help too, because he's a guy that's been in every situation. He's been, the backup. He's been the potential heir whenever he was drafted. He's been, the guy that's been bounced around. So I think Mason also can be a really good guide for Will Howard. And those guys may talk a lot because they're going to be on the sideline a lot watching Aaron Rodgers. So I think just overall, the whole totality of it, you come to Pittsburgh, place that is excited about you, that scouted you heavily. You're near your hometown or you're in your home state at the very least, and could be the number 3 quarterback and sit and learn behind 2 veterans with different paths. Rodgers, the future Hall of Famer, the first round pick. Rudolph, I want to say journeyman, but the guy that's kind of bounced around, had different career arcs over his time in the NFL. All that is good for Will Howard.
All right, I would kind of hope too that invitations out to Malibu would include guys like Mason Rudolph and Will Howard, right?
I'm not sure actually on that. Wouldn't be surprising, but I can't say for sure if the quarterbacks will come too. I know last year Russ took some of the quarterbacks out. I think they all were there, Fields and Kyle Allen. I don't know how that's going to work this year.
I would have tagged on to Rodgers talking about basically not having to twist arms to get guys to go out to Malibu. My first follow-up question real quick would have been, will those invitations include Mason Rudolph and Will Howard?
Be great if they did. I guess we'll find out because I assume this workout will happen, but I don't know who else will be coming along.
If he does talk one more time in these final 2 days, for media members that listen to us, there are probably not many of those that listen to us, but for those that do, that would be one of the questions I would ask real quick. Hey, you mentioned about taking some of these guys out to Malibu. Will those invitations include Mason Rudolph and Will Howard?
And Skylar Thompson.
And Skylar Thompson. I'm sorry.
Skylar, go get the trip out there.
Shame on me. Shame on me.
That's all right.
For not including him in that.
All right, Dave, let's talk about Aaron Rodgers' contract. As you mentioned, top of the show, his incentive package has been released. Albert Breer does a great job each year. I think he's the one that broke the Trubisky incentives a couple years back, so he does a good job being able to suss these things out. So we know all the potential additional money that Rodgers can make. It's all, I think, based around Rodgers playing at least 70% of the snaps during the regular season, and then the additional incentives are largely and really exclusively based on playoff success.
Yep. Let's see here. Particulars here. 500,000. If the Steelers make the playoffs, that is termed likely to be earned because the Steelers made the playoffs last year. And as the overarching thing within all this for any of these incentives to kick in, as he has to play 70% of the offensive snaps. But for right now, the 500,000 would be considered likely to be earned. 600,000 for a wild card win with 50% playtime in the game or a first round bye. And that's not likely to be earned. 750,000 for a divisional round win with 50% playtime in the game. That's not likely to be earned. 1 million for an AFC title game win with 50% playtime in the game. That's not likely to be earned. 1.5 million for a Super Bowl win with 50% playtime in the game. That's not likely to be earned. And 1.5 million for winning the AP MVP award, which is not likely to be earned. We categorize the not likely to be earned versus the likely to be earned because the impact it has in 2025 on his salary cap numbers. So only 500,000 of that, was it 5.85 million in incentives is considered likely to be earned. And we kind of theorize that a good chunk of these incentives would be not likely to be earned, and that is indeed the case. So to summarize, his cap charge for 2025 will be what, 14.15 million, I believe. If Aaron Rodgers earns the full 19.5 million that he could potentially earn in 2025, or really, I guess you got to take 1.5 out of that because he doesn't necessarily have to win the AP MVP award. So if you take 1.5 away from that, if Aaron Rodgers earns $18 million in 2025, there's going to be a parade.
Literally a parade.
Literally a parade. That means the Steelers have won the Super Bowl.
Right. So it's a good contract overall. The incentive structure is fine. And there's really not much more to be said about that. It's a good deal for Pittsburgh.
This is all right, Grandpa. What you got?
Yeah.
This is a Grandpa. What you got deal for Aaron Rodgers.
There you go. So good details. That contract fully in the books, and that'll provide a roadmap for Pittsburgh from a cash standing standpoint with T.J. Watt and any potential extensions for, say, Deshaun Elliott, any advance in salary for Chris Boswell, any outside addition they do end up making, if they do end up making, the addition of Jonnu Smith or Gabe Davis, even that's a minimum level contract, or any other guys they bring in.
Look, they're and I wrote this the other day after we got the Rodgers details. They're roughly about $19 million under the cap with a rule of 51. Right now, they obviously have the forthcoming expenses as the offseason continues to progress, things like 52nd, 53rd player, offseason workout bonuses, full practice squad, injury settlements, yada, yada. Predicting those forthcoming costs equal out to around 13.6 million, give or take. That gives them an effective kind of cap space room right now, 5.44 million, if you will. Obviously, that 5.44 million is off into the future that you're working off of. Not to be forgotten that notice I didn't say if, when the Steelers get a deal done with T.J. Watt, there's a good chance that his current cap charge goes down by, I don't know, $8-9 million, which will obviously free up some cap room that way. We'll see what happens with Chris Boswell getting a raise. We'll see what happens with Deshaun Elliott and a contract extension maybe this summer, kind of maybe slightly raising his cap charge. They've got plenty of room to do a lot of things from a cap perspective, and that means even going out and adding another quote unquote significant playmaker, however you want to frame it, tight end, another wide receiver, at a fair to middling kind of price, if you will. As I mentioned earlier in the show, they've got, it feels like, another $30 million in cash that they need to spend. I suspect they will. I think TJ Watt will be about 20 million of that. I think Chris Boswell potentially around another 3 million of that. You got another 7 million maybe even up to about 9 million to spend as far as cash goes above and beyond that. So they are in great shape in my estimation right now when it comes to both cap and cash spending.
All right, there you go. So I know you have the updated salary cap information on the Steelers. You can find that on SteelersDepot.com. And probably the last one we'll need to do for a little bit. But any other additions to get made significantly, then we'll update the cap again.
Sure. I think the next thing to kind of watch, obviously, is the TJ Watt thing. However long that strings along. In the meantime, what are they going to do with Chris Boswell? And I would imagine if they do anything with Deshaun Elliott, none of that would start until training camp gets underway.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, uh, they could do the Chris Boswell thing at any time, but I would imagine if they don't do anything in these next couple of days, that would be something else that's put off into the back burner until training camp gets underway as well too. So I don't envision, unless they go out there and add a playmaker in the next 4 or 5.5 weeks, that we're going to be doing many salary cap updates.
Right. Should mention that Jonnu Smith down in Miami, also one of those guys skipping mandatory minicamp as that contract situation remains ongoing. So no real updates there, but just should note that Jonnu Smith is taking the TJ Watt and Terry McLaurin route of being away from the team while this contract situation gets hopefully resolved in some form or fashion.
They're going to Washington is going to get something done with McLaurin, right?
I was going to ask you the same. I know that's been talked about a little bit loosely in Steelers online circles about McLaurin, the contract situation. He's unhappy with not getting a deal done. They trade for Deebo Samuel this year. I expect McLaurin to get locked up. I don't think Washington's going to be trying to subtract a big impact player like McLaurin, considering how far that Washington team came last year. So I think it will get done.
I think it will get done as well too. And look, if you are holding out hope that the Steelers trade for him, if they did trade for him, what's the big thing right now? He wants a contract, and I would imagine that he is angling to just barely top DK Metcalf. So could the Steelers do something? Yeah, I mean, you could always figure out a way to do something from a cash and cap perspective. But the fact that and he's a tad bit older, I think, than DK, and the fact that he would want to probably barely top DK, and he would also be angling for probably the same kind of guaranteed money DK. I would be absolutely shocked if McLaurin does wind up out of Washington. I would be surprised if it would be Pittsburgh.
I would be too, but there's really nothing preventing Pittsburgh from doing that. Who else are they spending the money on? They're not spending big money on quarterback. They're likely to draft a rookie quarterback next year, even in some sort of scenario in which Will Howard takes the reins. It's a rookie quarterback. So, there's nothing really stopping Pittsburgh from doing it, even though it is a lot of money in one position group.
From a plausibility aspect, from a cash and a cap standpoint, and I guess even from a trade compensation standpoint, there is a level of plausibility to it. It's just how much of the probability do you think plays into it?
Right, and I think McLaurin will stay in Washington. All right, Dave, any other thoughts from day one of minicamp? Coaches speaking, Mike Tomlin speaking, wasn't a whole lot else to really discuss there. Talk about some of the positional coaches. I love hearing from the positional coaches this time of year because they're always a little more honest, a little less polished, and speaking with the media. Remember hearing Zach Azzani last year praising Calvin Austin. That translated once the season began. Carl Dunbar, straight out saying you can write that Derek Harmon starting left defensive end in Pittsburgh's base 3-4. And so they're not wasting any time in getting Harmon into the lineup.
Yeah, and he says, "Look out there! He's out there now. You can." So many words said you can ride it and all like that. So until we hear a little bit, a little differently, that seems to be the plan. He was asked several different questions about the weight of Keanu Benton, and he's not concerned about that being too light of a weight for him being the nose. He said it's all about body construction or configuration, and even mentioned that Javon Hargrave was a little lighter than the 310 or whatnot I think Benton's at right now. So it doesn't sound like there's going to be any change there with Benton. He seems comfortable with Benton at the nose and at the weight that he's at. Just needs to finish more, I think, was some of the things that he said about him. Why Black, it sounds like moving around, sounds like biggest thing up front, strength of his is play against the run. It sounds like while the pads are off, they will continue to work with him as far as pass rush stuff goes, and I think that's maybe their biggest thing they want to develop with him moving forward, as far as obviously refining his play against the run. Want to make a better pass rusher out of him moving forward into the summer, but there's only so much that you can do without the pads on right now. Had quite a bit of praise for, who was the other one in there? Quale, I think, right?
Okay, I think so. I'd have to go back, and there was so much happening yesterday.
Talked about a guy that started to hand, several games, been able to move up and down the line. So I had some positive things to say about him. But yeah, I think that's kind of the long and short of what Dunbar had to say about the defensive line group.
On YA Black, it was interesting. I think a little different tone from what Dunbar had said right after the pick was made, where it was more, he's not going to play a ton of nose tackle. He's primarily a 4 tech. We like his size. We like his length. We want to play him a defensive end. Now it's a little bit more of, we're going to move this guy around. He'll kind of play everything. And I bet you the Montravius Adams release had something to do with that as well. Remember, Adams was on roster whenever the draft happened. He was released shortly after the draft. And I've always said it made more sense to put YA Black at nose tackle more so than defensive end. It's a good goal to develop him as a pass rusher and maximize that, but that's not going to be his game. I really don't expect YA Black to ever become an impactful pass rusher.
I'm with you there. I think run support is his strength.
A lot of communication talk from the coaches. New inside linebackers coach Scott McCurley and returning coach Gerald Alexander, now running the DB room, talked about streamlining communication and improving that. That was a big issue for Pittsburgh down the stretch. The players have talked about that. Patrick Queen's discussed that, and now we hear that from the coaches. So it's the classic, Dave, don't tell me about the labor pain, show me the baby type of thing there, but communication must improve. I think the coaching staff and the players recognize that.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that stuck out to me when going back through the audio of those position coaches yesterday. How many of them talked about communication? Gerald Alexander, was asked about what they got to do with Minka and to get in to make more plays. And he said, look, it all comes down to communication. Get people in the right spot and put yourself in position for more splash plays, not only from Minka, but everybody. You heard McCurley talk about a little bit about that when it came to Queen and Holcomb. You heard Terrell Austin, I guess, to some degree, mention it and all. And there seems to be a running theme with what we say every offseason going into the season. Yeah. How much better can the communication be on the defensive side of football for this team? And it seems to be a hot button once again, especially for the as far as I guess people not named Carl Dunbar that spoke yesterday.
Yeah, and that's going to be a big test. Obviously, if you can't communicate, you can't do those fundamental things, then nothing else really matters. And so a big point of emphasis, I'm sure, and a big reason why some of those coaches were changed out. I think Pittsburgh just unhappy with how things went down the stretch for a lot of reasons across the board. Nothing went well, but communication was certainly a big-time issue down the stretch.
Right. Anything else from any of the position coaches? We'll circle back real quick to the last question that Aaron Rodgers was asked about. How much freedom to audible do you anticipate, and how much do you think you'll be using your experience to take over as you see fit? He says, I don't understand that. They tried to get him, didn't they? With the last hook of that question. He says, I don't understand that last term, take over when I see fit. He says, I've called some 2 minutes over the years, but the idea that somehow I need to or have spent most of my career playing outside of an offensive system is just not correct. I'm going to learn the offense, and Arthur and I are going to talk a bunch this summer. If there's things that I like that I'd like to see in the offense, Arthur, I'm sure, is going to put it in. He knows how to call a game. I know how to get us in the right spot based on what's called. There's 2 or 3 plays called in the huddle sometimes. My job is to get us in the right play.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how it goes. It's a new relationship, and it's hard to exactly say how well it's going to all unfold. The success and failure of the team will dictate a lot about the perceived relationship, I'm sure, between Arthur Smith and Aaron Rodgers. But I'm not losing a lot of sleep over this idea that Aaron Rodgers wants to run the entire offense and take all control away from Arthur Smith. I think there'll be a feeling out period. I don't know. I hadn't get it's a lot of nuance to this conversation, Dave, about
Mhm.
calls to the line and how much freedom does a quarterback have and how much freedom should a quarterback have, and you're dealing with a Hall of Famer in the future like Aaron Rodgers and all those things. So it's probably a conversation and a thought that I want to kind of think about and sit on and watch training camp, observe how things go. But I mean, my overall thought is I'm not really worried about this being a big problem the way that maybe some people are.
I think the biggest thing that sticks out to me, agree or disagree. I know how to get us in the right spot based on what's called. There's 2 or 3 plays called in the huddle sometimes. My job is to get us in the right play. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I mean, agree that's how basic quarterback play works at the
Right.
NFL today. You don't just give one play call of okay, we are running this. There are no checks, there are no cans, there's nothing you can do. You can't change the protection. Like that doesn't happen for almost any quarterback in the NFL, much less a veteran like Aaron Rodgers. You better be flexible. You better be light on your feet, be able to adapt to whatever the defense presents in terms of their front, in terms of a blitz that you might be anticipating, changing a route, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think the offense certainly got a little static late last year where it felt a little rigid. One thing I think that will help overall, my kind of big picture thoughts here, Dave, is, Russell Wilson getting hurt in training camp last year, missing basically the entire summer or most of the summer, coming back in the preseason and then getting hurt again 3 days before the season begins. You don't come back until week 7. All that time was lost to really build
Right.
up trust between OC and quarterback. And that's such a critical relationship, maybe the most critical relationship in the entire team is your relationship between OC and quarterback. And so if Rodgers can be out there wire to wire, you're kind of in the trenches every single day, even though knowing that Rodgers is not going to get a ton of reps, or probably no reps in the preseason, maybe some limited work in training camp, but just being out there to be able to work through it from start to finish without the injuries kind of getting in the way and stunting that. I also think for Arthur Smith, it's year 2 for him, even though it is a new quarterback situation. You go in last year, it's a new OC, it's a whole new quarterback room. It is new for everybody. And that might lend itself to more rigidity where you don't want to be a little too outside your comfort zone and we're going to just call this and run our basic stuff because everything's brand new and we just need to kind of be able to do some of the basic stuff and run our system the way it's intended to be. Now that Smith is more comfortable in year 2, even though it is a new quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, maybe Smith will be a little more flexible as well. So it's all wait and see. I think the narrative will be dictated by just how well everyone plays. When Russ was playing well last year, there was no concern about Russ and Arthur Smith. When things went to crap down the stretch, it was a big concern about Smith and Russ butting heads. So yeah, I think what's the saying, to the victor go the spoils. I think if this thing works out well, it'll be regarded as a good relationship between Smith and Rodgers. If it doesn't go well, there'll be some story about something happening there. So overall, I'm not, like I said, I'm not losing a whole lot of sleep over the narrative.
I just hope Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy throughout the summer, and because probably not talked about enough was that downtime that Russell Wilson had during training camp and preseason about getting on the same page with some of those guys. I think
Right.
those reps, as a veteran can be, especially for a guy coming in for his first year with new supporting cast. Maybe that was undersold a little bit about all that time that Russell Wilson did miss, and it's hard to go back and recapture those lost reps, as few as they might be in 7-on-7, 11-on-11, 7 shots and all like that. You can never get those back of working through kind of being on well, this is where I expect you to be. And I think one of the downfalls to Aaron Rodgers season last year, especially early on in the season, and I think Aaron shots from Football Outsiders has a long article that people can find about how there were certain that he comes off as a big sounds like a supporter of Aaron Rodgers moving forward into his time in Pittsburgh, but how there were a lot of instances last year where it did not look like Aaron Rodgers was on the same page with his wide receivers there in New York.
Yeah, and that was all mess last year. You have coordinator changes, you have coaching changes, and so you have receivers being added, even though it was Devontae Adams. There's just a lot of shuffling that was occurring there last year. So I really can't speak to that situation too super well. I didn't follow it as closely as I will in Pittsburgh this year. But yeah, I mean, I'm not overall concerned. I think Smith, and it sounds like Smith and Rogers had a lot of communication over these last couple months. Albert Breer said, Arthur Smith has been building this offense with Rodgers in mind for the last 3 months, and so, you know, I think it'll be okay.
All right. Let's see some things coming in this morning. Arthur Smith says they didn't sign Aaron Rodgers and bring in DK Metcalf to run the wishbone. All right. And they want to run the ball more efficiently this year.
He can't help but get that little nugget in there. We still want to run the ball, but
Yep.
certainly want to have a more explosive pass game.
And it looks like wide receiver Coach Zach Azani has emphatically declared Calvin Austin III as the Steelers wide receiver 2. We'll see how long that sticks for the rest of the offseason.
Yeah, that's interesting to note there, but Austin's the guy with the resume that had the big, to me, I'll call it a breakout year last year. It wasn't this tremendous 1,000-yard season, but it was an impactful season as a receiver and punt returner. So, yeah, I think it's fair to make a young guy like Roman Wilson with 5 NFL snaps and 0 catches to work for that starting job.
All right, what did Danny Smith say that caught your eye yesterday?
Everything Danny Smith says catches my attention overall. I mean, there wasn't any one big thing. He praised Cameron Johnston. He's back to full health. That's basically been confirmed. Also praised Corliss Waitman for the job that he did. We'll see if there's an actual battle there or if Johnston's going to just be the guy. Talked about needing to improve field position, kind of downplay the team's lack of success in kick returns and kind of try to pivot it to more of a global field position thing. But of course, kick return average and field position are very much interlinked. And so those are kind of the takeaways.
All right.
All right, Dave, that's all I got. And then we want to get to start writing about today's stuff from coaches so we can get to a couple reader emails quickly and close out today's show.
Let me quickly do that. Comp picks from Dan. Good day, David Alex. Hope you blokes are doing well. Been listening to the podcast religiously as always. It helps make my work tolerable. This year, Omar Khan, that should be our new tagline. The terrible podcast. It makes work tolerable. This year, Omar Khan seems to have really zeroed in on acquiring compensatory picks, and it's got me thinking, if he keeps this approach going forward, how's it going to change the way Pittsburgh operates? For years, the Steelers have been running around like headless chook, I don't know what a chook is, trying to replace, that's an Australian term, trying to replace players with limited draft picks, so it's good to see them finally enter the comp pick game properly. What's the blueprint for maximizing comp picks year after year? Is there a specific formula or approach that teams can follow to consistently get those extra selections? Well, I think Omar did say several weeks ago that there was more focus on compensatory value this year. But look, the compensatory picks that you get in any offseason for obviously the year that follows, you got to have people that people are interested in, right?
And you got to have free agents who are you don't resign, obviously, too. You got to have enough of those guys.
Right. So are you going to forego re-signing a guy that you really like and want to be there in lieu of getting a compensatory pick or value and all like that? I just think that more than anything, Dan, that maybe this was kind of a unique situation that they had just good enough free agents and enough of them and guys that they didn't want to sign and spend the cash on that ended up playing into their favor of all these guys going elsewhere. I think it was just, look, do we want to spend X amount of money on Dan Moore, or are we willing to let him walk and knowing that he's probably going to be one of the higher marketable tackles that's going to get us somebody out there? Who is another one they lost?
James Daniels was not going to be brought back,
right.
So that was another comp pick.
Right. Dan, I don't know if, look, the Ravens do play this game better than anybody in the NFL. I don't think that they're ever going to get to that level. I just think that this was kind of a unique situation that the talent's kind of good there, but not good enough for us to re-sign. And we got enough of these that we're going to watch it play out and hopefully maximize it to its potential, especially with the draft coming up in Pittsburgh and kind of maybe foreseeing the fact that they're going to potentially need a franchise quarterback in that draft as well too. So until this becomes a trend, I don't know if we can look at it as this being the approach going forward. Would you agree?
Largely, I think the stars aligned this year with a big group of free agents and a team that was clearly like Pittsburgh wanting to turn over the roster and try something a little bit different. If you had last year's free agent pool where it was like Miles Killebrew and Mason Rudolph, you aren't going to get good comp picks really, no matter what your strategy is. I guess the thought would be on the other side, less about that in free agency because that's a little more, it's harder to predict. But do you try to sign more players who are cut? Do you try more trades? Do you your player acquisition, does that become different in order to try to manipulate the comp pick situation? Because one big reason why Pittsburgh has a bunch of comp picks or projected to get a bunch of comp picks is not just for the players they lost, but for not signing a bunch of free agents that will count against them in the comp formula. They signed Darius Slay, who was cut by Philadelphia, doesn't count in the comp formula. They signed Aaron Rodgers, who was cut by the Jets, doesn't count in the comp formula. They trade for DK Metcalf, doesn't count in the comp formula. Does Pittsburgh have an eye towards that a little more in the future in situations where they might anticipate losing some free agents and gaining some potential comp picks? Is that a strategy to think about and discuss?
Yeah, good point. Good point there. We'll have plenty of time to talk more about maybe that aspect of it. Dan, good question. Always good to hear from Dan. Dan is one of the listeners I want to meet one day, just for the sheer fact of where he's at. That means I could get over to maybe Australia over there. One of my bucket list things I think to do there. Paul,
and if we're playing a game there in 2 years, you can go to that one.
I don't know if I actually go to the game, but I would like to go to Australia. Let's see. One more from Paul Lutz. As always, great job on the podcast. I think you covered your coverage of Rodgers so far has been fair and balanced, which leads me to my question. I was racking my brain trying to think of who or some of the Aaron Rodgers tight ends were. I was having a hard time coming up with an A-list name with his ability to throw over the middle of the field and Pat Freiermuth possibly being his best receiving tight end. Could this be something bigger that nobody is noticing? He's had some good tight ends over there over the years with the Packers, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. We talked about Mercedes Lewis, Jimmy Graham, right? We should do Jimmy Graham in Green Bay for a couple
little
of years.
bit.
Yeah, towards the end of Rodgers' time in Green Bay, but still had a couple productive seasons in his 30s. I was thinking Bubba Franks, but I think that was more the Brett Favre era. I think Rodgers was on the team, but not really starting whenever Bubba Franks wrapped up his time in Green Bay. So Lewis, Graham, who else, Dave? Any other notable tight ends with the Jets last year?
What, Richard Rodgers over there for a little bit?
Yeah.
What about
California guy?
Jared Cook, I think, had a season over there.
Was Jared Cook in Green Bay? I forgot about that.
Jimmy Graham was over there. Mercedes Lewis, Robert Tonyan for a little bit was kind of a guy over there.
It's a good poll. 11 touchdowns Tonyan had in 2020.
What about Tucker Kraft for a little bit? Was he over there?
I think that was more in the Love era. Yeah, Kraft was drafted in 23, so they didn't overlap there. But I think we rattled off a couple of successful tight ends.
All right. Obviously, we'd like to see Freiermuth have at least a career year. I think it's plausible.
Yeah, I think production will be pretty much fairly similar, but hopefully some bigger plays downfield would be nice. That's kind of what I'm shooting for.
All right. So, Paul, I think we named off a couple of them. I would like to maybe go back and look. I haven't done it yet to kind of see the tight end usage last year in New York with the Jets, and that'll be something I kind of look at moving forward into the offseason here when it comes to looking at more Aaron Rodgers tape. So, good question there. All right, Alex, I know we got a lot of stuff coming in from the offensive coaches we want to cover and some players as well, too. You and I will be back on Friday to wrap up mandatory mini camp. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about there. Fill up an hour and a half that way. So this hour and 15 minutes is coming to an end here. You can follow me on Twitter/X at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the donate button. Also, if you like an ad-free version of the site, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the ad-free button. Follow directions that way. So until Friday, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.